Hello and welcome to the QA Therapy podcast. Are you looking to improve your overall testing and quality practices? My name is Sergio Freire and I'm a solution architect and a testing advocate at Xray.
And my name is Cristiano Cunha, and I'm also a solution architect and test advocate. And we'll be your hosts and QA therapists throughout this series. In this podcast, we're going to tackle some of the most common testing and quality challenges that we all face in our teams. So if this sounds good to you, keep on listening. So, in this episode, we will talk about risk storming. We'll talk about using risk-based approach in your projects, where testing plays a key part of it. We all have a basic understanding about risk, and we tend to assign it a negative value. But are there any ways of dealing with risk in an upfront and natural way that makes the team more aligned with what matters most for the stakeholders and users included? Can we deal with risk in a way that makes it more comfortable and manageable? So, to assist us in this topic, we have a special guest with us, so please stay tuned. Let's see what brings you here. What are the symptoms that you may feel that have brought you to this session? Do you have difficulties in knowing what to test? Or do you feel that critical issues are reaching production despite your efforts? Is anyone aligned regarding what risk is and how to quantify it? Do you understand what risk means for your product, team, or organization? Or even more, does someone complains about an important aspect that has problems in production and asks the team, why haven't we looking at this? This is crucial.
Yeah, all these are symptoms that appear when risk is not part of the equation or not properly understood. For sure, risk is always present in everyone's head, at least in my head, is always present, but sometimes we also forget. The issue is how to make the risk visible to everyone and have an alignment on how to classify it so that it can be used in our daily activities. And of course, how to consider risk into the testing activities we pursue. Let's dive a bit into this topic. And for diagnosis and prescription, we have here with us Chris Armstrong, our expert QA therapist, to assist us on diagnosis and prescription on the symptoms related to risk based testing. Chris is an active blogger and podcaster, participating in TestingPeers and 9 out of 10 testers, and probably more. Besides, he's quite helpful for the whole testing community. Welcome, Chris, and are you comfortable on our QA therapy couch?
Oh, hello. Thank you very much. It's a jolly comfortable couch. Thank you for your warm welcome.
So, Chris, let's start with let's say the basics. What, in your perspective, what is risk and where does it come from?
So, I spent a long time when I was just a young wee tester in my little shorts thinking about what risk was, and I genuinely thought it was something that was completely separate to quality. But the more I've spent time through my career, I've really come to the conclusion that quality and risk are intertwined. You don't really have a risk to something if you don't have a risk to your quality being affected. And so for me, risk is that opportunity for something to go wrong that affects the quality of your product in the terms of our software. Things that could go wrong. And I don't even see risks as negative things as long as I've identified those things up
That's
front.
interesting because I remember, let's say, having this online discussion about the meaning of risk, and there were different people actually giving feedback, and actually on the definition of risk, at least in some standards, is that it can be some positive or something negative. Sometimes people call this the positive risks, like the opportunities. But it's curious that you touch this point about quality and risk, and also I ask you the question about risk, but also I could also frame the question around what quality uh, is for you, and of course there's this close connection with risk, and there's this so huge discussion around what is quality that for years. Any insights around it, Chris? And I'm looking at your T-shirt. Well, you can see it on the
So
podcast, but
yes, yes. Well, I mean, so I once answered the question on Twitter that asked about what quality was, and for me, the response I gave was that quality is in the eye of the beholder. It's like it's not always a tangible thing, but it's something you know it when you see it, or when you experience the opposite, when you experience the absence of quality. And that was thankfully articulated even better by Stuart Crocker, who referred to quality as the absence of unnecessary friction. And really, I mean, yes, quality is different to different people. So when we're creating software, those people should be our users that define what quality is, and that is the measure by which we try to create something that is quality, and therefore it is also how we define what the risks to that quality is. It sort of goes backwards from that. But if we don't understand what the unnecessary friction is, we can't really define what
It's
quality
a
is.
good definition, and it has something that is common. Risk, as you said, is intertwined, but risk is also different for different persons. So, what's your advice on classifying risk?
It's all about asking the right questions, the appropriate questions. Whether that is what could go wrong, which is a perfectly acceptable question to ask. But also it's dependent on context. It really is. Everything is context specific. So it's the classic tester
It
answer to
depends. Yeah.
absolutely anything and everything. But it depends, but realistically, a risk is anything that could go wrong that's a threat to quality. Okay, I've said it a couple of times, but it it doesn't mean that a risk is something that needs to be a problem. It doesn't mean that something is going to stop us from producing great stuff. There's people try and categorize stuff, and fair enough, but it's just, if it's a risk to something that's right now, have I asked the right question? Is it going to affect these people? Is it going to affect this thing? How am I measuring my quality? Which we'll see later with the risk storming stuff. But is this risk something that's going to affect us? Is there another way around it? When you look at companies have service level agreements and stuff, and they might say like a support issue comes in, and there's a problem, but can I get around that? Is it something that's like an immediate showstopper, or is it's a problem, we need to address it, but we don't need to address it right now? The other stuff we're working on is more important. It's all a balance, and sometimes we as testers, we have feelings, and though they get hurt because something's important to us, but we aren't necessarily the judges of what that quality is. And sometimes we need to take that step back, evaluate the big picture, and understand whether this risk is something that needs to be addressed immediately, whether we can accept a mitigation or a workaround, or whether we have to actually just ignore the thing completely, which is hard to
so
let go.
you mentioned risk storming, so you are the right person to talk about it. So can you tell us a bit more about what risk storming is, and explain a bit with more detail?
Okay, well, to go back to when I was first introduced to the sort of the genesis, as far as I'm concerned, of the cards that inform risk storming, and these are the test sphere cards that you can get at Ministry of Testing's online store. They were demonstrated by Beren van Dalen, who's a wonderful testing community member. He did it in one of their 99-second talks. He said he'd got some cards, and he thought they'd be quite useful, and asked if some people would be willing to partake in understanding how to use them, whether they're for conversations or inspiration. And he's got these TestSphere cards that alone, there was endless possibilities with what you could do with them. The cards now, after having been expanded, cover 7 different categories, which are feelings, techniques, observability, heuristics, patterns, dealing with change, and what is key for risk storming, quality aspects. And later, a few years later, risk storming was something that then became an activity that people had been able to use TestSphere cards for. And you can download the physical kit to be able to run these sessions on Ministry of Testing's website, but there is also a risk storming online website as well. And the goal of risk storming is a collaborative activity that you do upfront, whether that's for a project or a feature, whatever it is, and you have discussions upfront about what are the key measures of quality, those quality aspects. What are the ones that are most important for us to measure the quality of our product? There are loads of quality aspects available to look at, and you have a conversation with your team, with your stakeholders, even with your customers if it's applicable to them, to identify what those areas are. And they can be things from the classic illities like changeability, testability, accessibility, to other things like performance, security, operations, data, things like that. And you talk about which ones are the most important, and typically you will identify maybe around 6 of those, and having decided those are the key measures that we have for quality on this particular feature or project. After that, you then do what I think is quite fun. Depends on your opinion. It could also make you pull out your hair, and if you're like a stakeholder who's a bit worried, but you think about anything, everything that could go wrong associated with any one of those quality aspects. Those are your risks. Those are your direct negative risks to your quality aspects, the things that could get in the way of a successful product. So, if you've got security as one of your key quality aspects, data breaches, as a really great example, is a very fine risk for those things. And you can do that if you have the pleasure of doing that with customers. My goodness, you can get from the horse's mouth the exact information about what it is that they have perceived as things that can go wrong based on the quality aspects that they've helped to define. And you can come up with literally anything. There isn't really a wrong answer. Sure, people can be a bit silly, but it's really good to sort of visualize collaboratively all of the things we think that could go wrong associated with the quality. It's all about focus. We're focused on the goal. The goal is to produce something, and we know how we're going to measure that that's successful. And now we know everything that could go wrong, or at least everything that we can go wrong based on our discussions and our research on these areas. So it's a 4-phase process: quality aspects, risks. The next step is mitigation. That's when we bring on board the other categories of cards from the TestSphere deck. So maybe we've got some accessibility risks. How do we address those? There's cards in there that will cover accessibility. There's things that relate to security. There's, unit testing. Who'd have heard of that? That can be a mitigation against certain problems. And you begin to sort of draw out these things. And it doesn't matter if there's duplication. Man, that's like, we're testers. We look for patterns. We look for things that are coming up. Well, this is clearly a very important thing. If we keep on coming up with this solution, we definitely need to ensure that this is something that we're always doing. And once we've worked through those parts, phase 4 is creating actions. Conversations and workshops are lovely, but if we don't have any actions that come out of them, they are a complete waste of time. If you don't do the stuff that you've been talking about, you might as well have not been talking and participating at all. And so that's a way of, we've understood all our mitigation steps, against all of the risks that apply to all of the quality aspects. And then we can say, this is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to do it. And this is all before, hopefully, anyone's
It's
written any code.
really,
And
yeah.
so you can build
It
it
seems
into your
really
process.
not, I would say, not important, but well, important of course, but also a session that needs a lot of effort from the team to do so, at least looking at what we have, discussing all of the things. Do you see this activity being something recurrent that you need to refresh, to redo in your working activity, or is it something that you can do beforehand and now everyone is aligned regarding risk and everyone now knows and can perform, or is it something that you see that we need to recurrently do to reevaluate, to redefine these sessions of risk storming?
Well, it depends, right? But it can be that it's something that you do at a project level, and then you do it with different people, because you can do this just with your team, your development team, but you can do this, like I said, with customers, with stakeholders. It can be done with a variety of different audiences, and therefore your output's going to get a variety of different answers, but all of which can provide value and inform the way that you work. And depending on how granular you want to get and where you have found the most value, you can either apply it as a short session that you run for every new feature kickoff, or you can run it for a bigger one for a project, or maybe just when a new team comes on or you get a new customer. I do think with any good sort of agile hat on, you try and apply that the three pillars of empiricism, the thing that we see, which is inspect, adapt, transparency. It's all about sharing these things and understanding it, but taking on board things that didn't work last time. Maybe you've tried running it with some stakeholders who didn't understand. Maybe we need to adapt and change those things. But I don't think it's something that is typically going to be providing much value if you do it once and never again. But also, if you didn't get value from it and you tried assessing it, maybe it doesn't work. But what it has done is it's taught you as a team to talk more about quality and risk. It's something that has to work for you. If you don't see value in it, don't do it. If you see value in it, do it more. Press into it more. Find ways to improve the process. The online app, as an example, was something that was quite difficult and quite buggy to start with, but they've improved the process now. It's a very much more collaborative tool to use, which means people can come in, they can export stuff, they can vote within the tool and things now. So even speaking with the people who have created the tool gives you the opportunity to provide value and say, this worked for us, could it maybe work for other people? It's not a one and done, and that's the beauty of a lot of these tools, is that you can try it and try and apply the
What
right
is the
if
risk
way
of
of
applying?
working for you.
Sorry, Christian. I was just
Go
asking
ahead.
what is the risk of trying it out and not being successful? We don't lose anything, right? Yeah.
You might lose some time that your online tool might tell you that 6 people cost this much money per hour. But typically, if you've tried something and maybe you failed at it, you've still learned a lesson. And learning lessons is valuable because we're trying to uncover new information the whole time anyway.
At least you ignite the conversation. Even if you didn't get further on it, you plant the seed, right? So now everyone is aware that something called risk can be accountable when we have ways to cope with it. It's just investing on it.
It's a clear way of associating risk and quality, but doing it in a way that is completely open and shareable amongst the team. Everybody sees, everybody participates, everybody has a voice, so that it's not just people are given a bunch of work and told this is what you have to do. It's you're bought in to the process, you're bought into the why you're doing that thing, and you're bought into the how, because we've discussed how we're going to address that.
I think that's a very interesting way of framing it, because sometimes people get things as tasks that they have to do, but then there is no, let's say, initial conversation around it. There is no engagement, so people don't feel that that eventually that task is something that they see being worth because they didn't provide their opinions or their feedback on it. Um, Chris, we were talking about testing, about doing this early, let's say, for teams that are eventually with Agile adopting Scrum. Do you see this, let's say, team adopting Scrum? Do you see this being done when the at the start of the project, eventually at when there's like some epic coming, or like every sprint, or you would see this more dynamic depending on the granularity, on the deliverable that we may be working in.
I've seen it work where we've had a kickoff before we've done some refinement, where stakeholders come in and they've said, wanted to present, this is the feature we're going to do, this is why the feature, and now we're going to do a risk storming session to identify these little bits that we want to gain greater focus that applies to us within the software development team, and also to inform, therefore, how we will test things, what we're going to test. And that's worked really well in those processes, as well as when we've onboarded new customers. Say you're making a bespoke version of your tool to a certain customer, bring them on, do a session with them, and again, different people each time. But yeah, it works perfectly well with a Scrum team who are just kicking off on a new feature or something for their refinement. It helps provide that focus right at the beginning of that as well, because I've seen refinement sessions not done particularly well, and the same with planning and things where people still don't know why, even when things are brought into sprint. But this answers a lot of those questions, and hopefully fuels enough information so that when you have your three hats, your Triforce, your Three Amigo session, that you the conversations are much shorter. You go, right, well, we've got this information. Is there anything else we need to know? It actually helps you be optimal, even though you might start a bit slower at the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
I was thinking maybe that um, we have been talking about risk, but when teams are not used at all to talk about risk, do you think it is easy for them to start doing so? When there was no conversation about risk whatsoever on the past, do you think um, is it hard, or
Yeah, that can come down to like a quality culture thing in your organization. Because I think we know of a lot of examples where people have worked in teams where they don't really question stuff.
yeah?
They just do what they're given. They don't necessarily get to challenge things. But actually, motivation wise and sort of participation wise, we believe that quality belongs to the team, and the team should be able to own that thing from start to finish. But how can you own something you don't understand when you can't see and measure for yourselves how good it is? If you think about the chef in a kitchen, they are making a sauce, and they're constantly trying things and adapting and changing based on how they've tasted it, because they're not going to provide something that they think is low quality to people. And how can they know if something's quality if they haven't tested and tried the thing? What are the risks to that? Not trying and testing those things are, it's a complete unknown that I'm presenting to people. But what if I'm presenting to people who have got intolerances? What if I'm presenting to people who don't like certain kinds of foods? If I don't have that information, I'm not necessarily going to provide something that's of high value to them. And all of those things happen because you asked questions. Like, we should be encouraging curiosity and critical thinking and ownership, because without those things, we're not really being humans. And we are humans creating things for humans who are going to consume these. These are human problems that we're trying to solve as humans using technology.
Yeah, for sure. Real value comes out of those conversations for sure. But in your experience, I don't know if you used in your work experience, do you know what's the major advantage of adopting risk storming And do you have an example of it?
What's the value? I mean, the value is really it's understanding things sooner. It's knowing, like, there's nothing worse than one scenario. I remember sitting in a demo, and we're all sat there. The work's demoed. It's all ready to go, ready to ship. This is going to get shipped this
Just
afternoon.
let's
Don't
demo
worry.
in.
Key stakeholder, the hippo, the highest paid person in the office. They sit there and go, "That's not what I want. That's not getting shipped. I don't like that." Now that hippo, he had signed off on designs at the very beginning. But guess what? A design that you sign off on at the beginning may well change depending on circumstances as you
Yeah.
go through the development process. There's different reasons, there's constraints, there's technology, there's lots of different things, and the team apply best of their knowledge the ways to address these things. And they went through all these things. They'd maybe tried to get hold of the hippo, but the hippo was a busy person. They're running a company, and so they get to all this point. They do this, and then they're told they can't ship it. Suddenly, 3 months worth of work has been lost, and they have to go and rework absolutely everything. And this hippo, who isn't available very often, wants to be intertwined and working with all these bits to try and like chop and change it. Now, how could that have been addressed? Well, we can address it by saying, right, okay, let's talk about things up front. Let's talk about what could happen that might mean that thing that you understood was going to happen has changed. We have to manage expectations of people, because there's a risk that this changing technology means that this implementation won't look exactly the same as that. But as long as I understand the core functionality that you're after, I can still deliver the best thing to you. But that doesn't mean that we just do that up front
Mhm.
and then don't discuss things. It's the point of working in a sort of agile way is that we are transparent with what we are doing, and therefore we can continuously say, this is where we were at, these are the risks we highlighted, this is how we've mitigated those things, these are the changes that we've encountered. Now we're going to iterate, we're going to take that feedback on board, and we're going to change based on that. And we are transparent so that Hippo can access all of that information as they go through. They can see the changes. Their expectations have been managed already. They've had those conversations. They've like said, this is the most important thing to me, and I can meet that need. And we should hopefully be mitigating those problems later down the line, because as we all know, the classic diagram of the later we get the feedback, the bigger that loop is, the longer it's going to take us to get back to reworking that thing, because there's been so much more that's been added to that. Short feedback loops allow us to quickly adapt and change.
And I remember that it's that also that example that you mentioned also happened to me in the past, and it's not really a good experience. I have to say, yeah. And then you have to delete
Hurts
code, and
morale.
we struggle so much deleting stuff that we already have done, and it was so amazing, but it was useless in the end.
Yeah, one of the key things that you just said for me is it also helps on our decision making, because if we are all aligned at the beginning regarding quality and risk, even when you have to choose without the input of the hippo that may not be available, if we are all aligned on the risk, on the things that drives us towards a goal, we are probably going to take the better decision for the context, because we are all aligned, and we will produce probably the better output possible, aligned with everything that was defined at the beginning. So it's also helpful, in my view, to have that kind of thing. Yeah.
I, I, I was sorry for interrupting, Christian.
Oh, go ahead.
I was you mentioned one word that I think is really interesting in this context, was the word choose. Because I remember whenever we are developing some system, some software solution, and basically we have to take decisions. It's impossible for us to tackle all the possible risks, all the possible things. Sometimes people ask us for bug-free products, and we all know that that's impossible to have. So and exercises such as risk storming or similar ones can have, I think, uh, we bring to the table this conversation around risks, uh, and we have to take a decision how to manage them. well, which ones should we prioritize? If we can mitigate them somehow and this is like a commitment with the team and with also the stakeholder, right, Chris?
So, um, I think we have the counterpart of the question, of course, that always appears. That is, uh, what can go wrong if you adopt it? What can you do that affects negatively if you're using this risk storming? I think you lift a little bit of the veil about it. Is well, at least for me, doing those sessions and not act upon them. I think that's the one bad thing about it. That is just to show, yeah, we did it, but nothing happened. So why worth it? But do you have any other bad experience with it?
Yeah, well, just to carry on that point, before I carry on, is it's the same true
Oh
with
yeah,
literally anything we do. Like, if we have retrospectives and we commit to actions and then we don't do anything, what's the point in the retrospective? The same things happen. Like, why have these conversations, these sessions to do stuff if we don't? If we create actions and we should action them, and I think that's on our leaders to really help give us time and the ability to do those things going forwards. Um, Beyond that, I think the risk around only doing risk storming is there's constraints. Like, it's got fantastic breadth in what it covers, but there's
yeah,
always going to be feature gaps in a tool, and we need to use this more along the lines of a heuristic rather than an explicit linear thing. Find something that we can get value out of this process, but don't be bound by just the words that are before us. These are all opportunities for conversation to help us question things, but we shouldn't bind ourselves just to what the words on the card say. They are there to help
yeah.
us, they're not there to constrain us. And the risk is we say, this is the only way that we now identify risk. If somebody mentions something that doesn't relate to a quality aspect that we have a card for, that doesn't mean we shouldn't consider that. And in fact, TestSphere comes with blank cards so that you can write your own ones. And the good folks at Risk Storming, will happily take your suggestions on board and try and create these things so that they can be socialized and shared with other people, because it's about producing value. The worst thing you can have about published work is that it
Yeah,
remains set in
static.
stone as it was and it doesn't iterate and change. So that's a great big risk. But the other one is the way you can run these sessions requires people to have a collaborative spirit and to feel comfortable in their environment to share and to come forward things. And for a lot of folks, maybe the environment of how those sessions are run doesn't work for them. Maybe a lot of people feel that there's a barrier to entry for them, whether you run it as an in-person one, whether you run it online. And for some people, that can be too much. And so, again, a risk is we just run this session as is and we don't consider those other people. When in reality, I don't know about you, but a lot of the people I've worked with have got fantastic ideas, perspectives that are different to mine, and therefore they are super valuable because I won't have considered those things. And so we need to find a way that it can incorporate those people without them feeling like they have to attend a session where everyone can hear everything they say and they're very
That's true.
uncomfortable. And a lot of the problems come around facilitation, and maybe that's on your Scrum Master for running things, but the art of facilitating should be inclusivity. It should be that it's accessible to people. And for some people, running a session like this in a group will not work. And if we exclude people from that, we are reducing the value that we will get out of the session. And for me, I think those two constraints are possibly the two biggest risks. The other one is purely that somebody looks at it and goes, "It's just a testing thing,"
Yeah,
and they just go,
Yeah,
"It's not for me. I'm
not
not a
for
tester.
me.
Testing's not on my job
Yeah,
title. I don't care."
been there.
So it's communicating these things, proving, showing that there is value in that work, and I think giving up on something that you know is going to provide value and you are seeing value just because there's a few bad eggs. Um, it's sometimes persist, iterate, change, fight through.
Yeah.
There is value in many different ways, but risk storming is something that is a wonderful and ever evolving.
And like everything, adapt to your context, to your situation, because it depends. Always.
It always depends. It's a running joke.
So, Chris, any finishing comments or advice regarding this topic?
I guess the most exciting thing is these things are accessible and available for everyone to get out and try. If you're worried about how to broach the conversations, how to start those things, the folks at Risk Storming Online, they're on Twitter, they're on LinkedIn. riskstormingonline.com exists online for you to be able to go and play with for free. There are people, including myself, that you're very welcome to reach out to and help to sort of introduce these conversations and concepts to people that can even help you begin to facilitate these things. Ultimately, we all want to see the world become a better place. And if we've got something that we want to share with people, we should be given that platform. And I want people to be able to do things better. I also want people to challenge me on the way I do things. And so for me, the best advice is to go out, seek these people, find out more about the tools. If you can get hold of the physical cards, the TestSphere cards, get hold of them, play with them, have conversations about them, reference those things. And as far as the risk storming sessions go, I can't help but include that in strategies for teams that I'm a part of, because it is such an inclusive whole team on the same page activity that I just think is so valuable for teams to work with. It adds focus and it promotes collaboration, which are all things that we really need in software development. And ultimately, I think it's quite fun.
That's a spirit, yeah.
And I quite like having fun at work. Yeah.
It's just, let's say, in my perspective, I think it's great when we have these exercises where we get all the team to give their perspectives, and we can have, let's say, a safe environment for people to actually collaborate, because sometimes other approaches they simply don't work.
Yeah, and there will be cynicism. There will be people who won't want to participate. That's fine. That happens in life. But for me, I think my enthusiasm for quality outweighs my fear of non-participation and people trying to block it. And as long as that's the balance, go for it.
Thanks for being here with us today, Chris.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we can now have a better understanding on risk storming and some clues also now to adopt it. We can say that we can now even navigate the storm towards safety with better risk handling.
So see you in our next therapy session. Happy testing.
Happy testing.